Yeah, I'm Sebastian. Thanks for having me here and thanks for coming here. Just to gauge a little bit where we're standing here, who has kind of like done anything in crypto before? Like anything actively touched any crypto? Okay, a few. Who here have like set up a crypto wallet ever? Like a crypto wallet is not Binance.com, it's not Coinbase.com. Anything that ends on .com is not a wallet, okay? All right, good. That's cool. Now, I'm VP Tech at Gnosis. I'm also founder of a privacy project called HOPR. We'll talk about it next year, working on an actually maximally anonymous VPN. But for today, I'm gonna talk about more the money side because I heard that's what people here are excited about. I'm not a money guy. I don't find money exciting. Why yet work in this space? I hope to convey in this talk. So before we get there from fair money to fintech on chain, as I called it, I will give a quick background on what this company, well, company isn't even a real word for this, Gnosis is and what it has done over the time. So Gnosis started with prediction markets. One of the first projects that was running on the Ethereum blockchain right after the launch in 2015. And for the ones who are not familiar with prediction markets, you probably have not followed the US election last year, right? Because there was all this, who's going to be the president? And it turned out that a piece of technology knew the answer before the New York Times kind of admitted to know the answer. And there are prediction markets, right? So marketplaces where you can bet on an outcome of a certain event or an answer to a question such as, what is the name of the next US president, right? You can call this like a betting market, and betting markets tend to be kind of centralized and manipulatable and so on. So there was this idea of running this on more resilient rails that are blockchains. Now, this is not Gnosis, this is called Polymarket, one of the biggest prediction markets on the planet. But if you look at how Polymarket actually works, and if you look at their technical docs, they are still working on the Gnosis conditional token framework. So yeah, maybe Gnosis was a bit ahead of its time, but that's how they started, did a token launch, and yeah, have been growing then. Working in a bunch of things. So for the ones who have been trading, you might have heard about like decentralized exchanges like Uniswaps, which all goes back to the notion, I will not go into the details of that, but for the ones who are interested, of X times Y equals K, which is basically a pretty elegant way of saying you can have two assets which are paired and you will always have liquidity in the market without a traditional market maker being involved. And that's kind of funny. You can code this in very few lines of code. That was granted one of the earlier decentralized exchanges, but it gave rise to basically DeFi because we had tokens and tokens were kind of fun, but if you cannot trade your tokens natively on a chain, that's kind of pointless, right? So that gave rise to an explosion of actually doing things with tokens and earning yield on it and lending platforms and all these like really interesting stuff that is now available and very actively being developed, traded, and moved around. Now, when you do move things around, there's the next problem for Gnosis is how do you secure your assets, right? So we had a few hands up of the brave ones who have set up a wallet. Well, there's the question is, how do you manage that wallet if you have really, really a lot of money, right? And it turned out that some people really had a lot of money, and Gnosis had a similar problem, so they developed something that's called Safe. So Safe.global is the largest kind of multi-sig, so it allows you to have multiple folks that are signers on a joint account, right? That's a multi-sig. And this is just some stats from Dune. Dune.com is basically this blockchain analytics, real-time insights. And so in safes across chains, we currently have something around $60 billion secured, $6 billion out of that in stable tokens. So if you think smart contracts are not secure, bullshit or whatever, here's a $60 billion bounty for you. This thing has not been hacked to date. Like there have been incidents on some front ends that somebody was using. Actually, a couple of months ago, some centralized exchange thought you can use some, third-party hosted web front end. That didn't end up so well, but again, the smart contracts have not been exploited. we look at the distribution of capital over time, you see the cyclical movement of crypto markets, obviously. But yeah, most of the assets in US dollar terms are secured in Ethereum mainnet. Yeah, so that was kind of one necessity. And the next necessity that Gnosis saw that, okay, we have a bunch of assets, we can trade them now, and I heard we have a bunch of BlackRock folks, right? So we have all these bad secondary effects of markets, like, you know, if you bring in the institutionals or just like people with a lot of money, there's a lot of like messing around, right? Like front running. We've seen actually, like, you will be very delighted by looking at, you know, the so-called MEV, maximally extractable value. We don't just have front runs, we have also paired atomic front runs and back runs, right? See, people are very excited about that. So that's cool. We have that in forms that could not have been played in traditional markets because you as an absolute nobody can come in and do like a couple of $1 million front runs and back runs, actually even without any capital. That's a story for another day. But Gnosis realized that is bad for the trader, right? If you constantly screw over the trader is not going to be so happy. So Gnosis came up with a major piece of innovation, CowSwap. Cow.fi is the domain for that one. The major piece of innovation is it's a decentralized exchange, a DEX, that goes moo after you trade. Now the actual innovation of that one is that it takes this malicious secondary effects of the front running and back running and feeds the profits off of that back to the user. That's kind of cool because it shows you how you can take market externalities and turn it around against those who try to backrun the user by providing a competitive market, right? So you're basically bidding against one another. So if you're a solver and I say, like in this example, I want to trade 1 ETH against US dollar, it's just a screenshot I took last night, right? Then in this case, there's now multiple people who are bidding to provide the most competitive price. And sure, I can backrun you, I can front run you and screw you a little bit, but that means I will lose that bid, right? So if you have multiple of those solvers competing against one another, like that's a pretty nice thing of solving this problem of MEV. Anyway, these are just examples of two of the examples that came out of Gnosis, have been spun out as their separate entities, and that was a bit of history. Now, looking a little bit at the contemporary, what is currently going on, and I will focus on two directions that Gnosis is working on. One is more fintech, and the other one, you will question my sanity a bit later. So let's start with the more fintech one. So if we look at contemporary banking, we saw banking 1.0, which was kind of boring. We saw banking 2.0, which was a little bit less boring. And now, like we say, there is the potential for a new era of banking, what we would call the ownership era. Like you are in control of your assets and data. How does that work, right? Like that is weird. Well, some of you are managing their crypto assets by themselves, self-custodially, that's cool. But how do you connect that to the rails of the old world? That is kind of problematic, right? And Gnosis Pay tries to be the answer to that. So Gnosis Pay is a self-custodial Visa debit card that, yeah, is basically working just like a neobank, and the card is actually just the first offering. There's also like a SEPA payment integrated into it, which is basically providing or trying to provide kind of the critical layers of a financial stack, in a new fashion. So just to give you a high-level summary, and you can then look into or ask me later on into the pieces that you find most interesting. You store value in an on-chain smart account. What does that mean? It means what I mentioned before, safe, right? So you have these smart contracts which can be multi-sigs, they can be just controlled by yourself, you can add backups or whatever you want. That is where you store your value, right? Obviously, unfortunately, we need this compliance because if you play with the old world, you need to play according to the rules of the game. So yes, if you order a Gnosis Pay card, you need to do KYC, you need to do AML, and so on. We're doing basically kind of a screening of incoming transactions. So if you happen to be North Korea and have a few $1 billion laying on the side, you cannot onboard that to the card, obviously, right? So you have then the debit cards. and there's local payment rails. So right now what is integrated into Gnosis Pay is Monerium, which allows you with an on-chain signature to make a SEPA payment. So that is kind of cool because you don't need to go through a centralized exchange anymore. You can sign something which is, from that point obviously not self-custodial anymore, but you can basically send money directly, make a SEPA payment without having the bank account anymore in and by itself, which I find very cool. And finally, the part that I'm most excited about obviously is the DeFi side of things, right? So you can natively and directly integrate that with decentralized exchanges, lending platforms, staking derivative protocols, and so on. And all of that in a kind of seamless fashion. So yeah, that's what we built there at Gnosis Pay. GnosisPay.com if you want to give it a try and try it out. And the idea of this one is also to be kind of developer focused. So right now you can integrate that into your own wallets. So if somebody's working on a wallet or has friends working on a wallet, we are actively looking for partners to integrate that because at Gnosis we realized we are technology people. We're not necessarily the best people to bring stuff to market. So there is somewhat of a B2B focus to rolling that out. Now, finally, what is this actually about, right? Like, what the hell are we actually doing here? What is the actual only value proposition of crypto? I'm not going to ask you, you can think about it. I know many people of you are thinking it's like, make money quickly, right?
That's like the hedge against the currency which can be printed at an infinite level. So it gives this sense of it's a finite asset. I mean, talking about Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm not going to bore you. So, yeah, there's some money.
Tokenization of everything.
Tokenization of everything. Like, why? Like, what's the point?
To have no central entity can take control of everything.
We're getting there. The only value proposition of crypto is to empower the individual through resilient technology. That's the only value proposition. We could have made more money faster before. We could have had business process optimization before if we actually wanted to digitize. We didn't want to. Crypto's not going to change any of that. The only value proposition of crypto is, to put it in Vitalik's word, is to make the human a little bit more free. Everything else you could have done in SQL 30 years ago and you should have, right? If you think that you can make money faster with crypto, you will end up working on really premature technology that is really painful to work with. And after 5 years of working really hard on really shitty technology, you will find out that this does not make sense. So that's quite great, right? But if we think about it, how does that connect to what I mentioned before with money, right? So how do we make something a little bit better from a societal perspective? And if we look at crypto, like one number that I find very interesting is the Gini coefficient. Like this is, by the way, wealth and not income here, right? Otherwise you see somewhat different numbers. What I find interesting is if we look at highly unequal countries like Brazil or the United States, like UK is quite a bit better. So we find that Bitcoin, for example, is actually somewhere upper. By the way, high means more unequal. So from a societal perspective, this is not great, right? So yes, you can question these numbers. I give you the sources here.
Sorry, what does it mean, Gini coefficient?
Gini coefficient is basically a measure of how unequal the distribution of wealth is in a country, right? So ideally, you want lower numbers means like we're all kind of similar. So it's a measure of inequality. And a high number means like we're actually super inefficient. So a number of 100% means all money belongs to one person. Yeah. So that's kind of uncool. And if we look at that, Bitcoin is kind of crappy, right? So Bitcoin led to a lot of people who are early on, who hold a huge stash of money and are very rich. Is that great? Is that empowering an individual? No, it's not. Like from a societal perspective, crypto is not great. So that begs the question, how can we do it better? And given the technology that we have with kind of general purpose ledgers that are not just settlement layers, but on which you can execute arbitrary logic, what does that allow us to do in terms of money? What can we do new? And here's an experiment. The experiment is ongoing right now at Gnosis, and it's called circles. Or in a multipolar world, let the people issue the money, their own money. That's weird. Let's look at how that works. So basically, who can create an account and issue money? Everyone, right? Okay, that's weird. If everybody can issue money, then, well, how is money valuable, right? Well, and this is where kind of this general purpose blockchains, which you can program to execute specific logic, come in, right? You can program this money such that everybody is forced to follow that logic of this particular smart contract. And in circles, we have this transitivity that you choose who you trust. And let's look at this one. If I transfer, let's say, Alice wants to transfer 100 of their circles, CRC, to Charlie, right? And, you know, Alice, she doesn't trust Charlie. She doesn't know her directly. You can only transitively transfer money towards people that you trust, which means that you accept their circles in exchange for the ones that you issue on a one-to-one basis. As a first step, Alice is transferring 100 CRC to Bob, right? So Alice is taking 100 of hers and sending it over to Bob, right? So Bob now has 100 Alice CRC more on his balance. And then Bob transfers 100 of his CRC to Charlie in exchange. So basically Bob is net zero, right? Alice sent 100 and Charlie received 100. And thereby we have created an economy where you only accept the money of the people that you trust. And if I trust Maciej, and if Maciej has like 100 Sybil accounts, like fake accounts that he just made up that I all trust, well, I'm the fool, right? But also the blast radius of his action is contained to me. So the only one who loses out is me, because I get this, you know, in this case, maybe he makes 20 fake accounts, I get this 2000 CRC that nobody else accepts. So the transitive nature of this is something that kind of contains the blast radius of fake accounts of people making up bad money, right? And that's why as a Schelling point, we have this notion that you just trust people who you think do not have fake accounts. So this is not like, you know, this is not a Facebook group where you just let everybody in. This is something where you trust people who you think are real humans. Now, how do we issue that? Just very briefly, there's an issuance rate of, you can only issue 1 CRC per hour. How's that enforced? That is enforced because CRC, the token that you issue, is a smart contract. And that smart contract has been programmed to have a fixed issuance rate. You cannot break that. And secondly, this is interesting, there is a demo rush. So you pay basically a tax of 7% that just gets burned. And the idea of that is that you contain somewhat the richer getting richer, right? If you run these numbers, actually eventually you will reach a break-even point of roughly 120,000, right? So at 120,000, the 7% annual demo rush equals the issuance rate, right? So at steady state, you can never have more than 120K. This is kind of interesting. And this selective trust system that we just went through in this example, where you can just transitively transfer along the trust edges. So that is an experiment. Is that experiment going to, you know, replace the US dollar? Yes, right? Yes. And yeah, we will see how it does that, right? So this is an experiment that is ongoing, and we will see how that goes. Now, if you want to join that experiment, and we can do that in a networking session later, you can go to app.metri.xyz, which is the front end, which also, by the way, allows you to add your Gnosis Pay card. And yeah, we can later on go around and trust people. So you need to be invited by someone, which maybe in this room is only me. So maybe there's some shortage. There's actually an invite fee. I'll see if I can, you know, cover it for everyone. But yeah, we can do that later on in a networking session. Anyway, that is Circles, one of the more interesting monetary experiments going on at Circles. No kings, no banks, no drama. Thank you so much.